Hello and welcome to this tech talk called Real-Time Interagency Data Sharing with Data Virtualization. My name's Paul Moxon. I am the Senior Vice President for Data Architectures and Chief Evangelist at Denodo Technology. I'm going to be your host and entertainment for the next 15 or so minutes. In this session, I'm going to talk about how government agencies can accelerate and simplify the sharing of data, both within the agency and also with other government agencies, whether it's at the federal, the state, or the local level, by using data virtualization. I'll also talk about how a national government agency, the National Health Service in Scotland in this case, is using data virtualization to share data in this way, and the types of projects and data sharing that it's been able to actually perform. Finally, I want to talk about a great example of how data virtualization can quickly and easily access data from many different agencies, in this case from around the world, to provide a data portal where users can come and access the data that they need. This is Denodo's coronavirus data portal, and we'll talk about this a bit later in the session. Now, I'm sure you're all aware of the challenges of sharing data both between agencies and often within the agency, within different departments within a particular government agency. There are technical challenges about the data being in the different formats, having different meanings because they have a different taxonomy, etc., different security requirements, and so on. There are also issues and concerns about data ownership. It's my data. I need to control it. I need to look after it. And if I give it to you, then I might lose control of my data. And that is also something that we see in data security and data privacy compliance. For example, in health and human services, having to conform and comply with the regulations around, say, HIPAA for patient privacy, etc. And also, how is the receiving agency going to use the data? If I give you this data, how are you going to use it? How do I know you're going to use it in a way that is appropriate for the data and the privacy and the confidentiality of the data, etc.? And often, interagency data sharing is using what are relatively antiquated methods of dumping data into a file and then transferring it across every day, every week, every month, etc. And that has its own challenges. For example, in Australia, there's a state organization there, the Office of State Revenue, which does a daily transfer to its sister department, which is the Department of Treasury and Finance. If anything goes wrong with those transfers, they have a team of data engineers who have to go and fix them because the next day's transfer is not going to pick up yesterday's data. It's only going to pick up that day's data. So they have a team just fixing broken file transfers, and this is not obviously very good. So we'll look at data virtualization and how data virtualization can help. But before we do that, let's talk about what data virtualization is. And Gartner have this definition of data virtualization. It says that data virtualization is a technology that can be used to create virtualized and integrated views of data in memory rather than physically copying the data. So in other words, the data stays where it is and it's retrieved on demand and presented to the user. So the owning agency is actually keeping the data. They're just allowing people to come and get it when they need it. So I'm not suddenly giving you all my data. I'm just opening the door and saying you can get some of the data, but only the data I'm going to allow you to get. And also provides an abstraction layer on top of the physical implementation of the data. Now this is great because it decouples the two parts of the equation. It decouples the owner of the data from the user of the data. Now I can control my own data. I can do what I like with my data. But I'm giving you that doorway, that gateway into the data so you can get what you need, but I'm going to take care of it. And when you come and get what you need, you can use the tools that you need. You don't have to comply with what I'm saying about you have to use this tool, I'm going to transfer the data in this format, etc. So it's a great way of decoupling the owning of the data from the usage of the data, leaving control with the owner. So if you look at this a bit deeper, data virtualization is this layer that sits between the data and the consumers of the data. Could be the other agencies, could be departments within the same agency. we have this mantra: connect, combine, and consume. Connect to the data sources and create virtual views. Combine the data, define how the data should be combined, integrated, transformed to create the data view, the virtual view of the data that the user actually needs, and then expose that to them so that they can come connect to the data virtualization platform and get the data that they need. So again, what data is available and accessible is controlled by the owner of that data. The consumer of the data, the other department, the other agency, etc., can choose how they're going to get the data, but they can only get to the data that they're allowed to get to, that they need to get to. So if we look at this in a bit more detail, go back to the same diagram, the data virtualization platform between the data and the consumers. You connect to your data sources, you create something called, in Denodo terminology, called base views. These represent the underlying data entities, but it abstracts away all the complexities of where the data is, what formats it's in, etc., what authentication mechanism I use to get to that data. That's all abstracted away by those base views. So those base views become reusable building blocks. I can now combine them together to create something until I eventually get something which is meaningful to my users, whomever they are, inside the agency, external to the agency, etc. The users can then connect to the data virtualization platform. It's almost like this data access layer, this data gateway. They can connect to the data virtualization platform using the tools that they choose, using the tools that they're familiar with. So if I want to combine claimant data with payroll tax data, maybe I'm looking for people who are doing fraudulent claims on workers' compensation benefits or something like that. I can access it from the tools that I'm familiar with. It could be a reporting tool like Tableau or Power BI, and I request the data. The data virtualization platform will go and get the data that I need from the underlying data sources and actually return it back up to me as a user. The data virtualization platform doesn't keep a copy of the data, it just gives me the results, the data I need. The data stays in the data sources, so I'm not physically copying the data, under the control of the owning agency. So in a nutshell, data virtualization platform allows you to connect to your data. Allows you to define how that data should be integrated, transformed, combined to create something that is meaningful to your users, whether they're internal to the agency, external to the agency. And then those views can be exposed and using a number of protocols, formats, and the consumers, the users of that data, can connect the data virtualization platform using their own tools, their preferred tools, to get the data they need. But we're not physically copying the data. They're just getting the data, retrieving the data they need when they need it on demand. So that's that snapshot of what data virtualization is. Government agencies using data virtualization, they run from federal agencies, state, local government agencies, national agencies throughout Canada, yes, Canada, as well as the Europe and the Asia Pacific region as well. So a broad swath of different types of different levels of agencies using it to share data inside the agency and also external to the agency, inter and intra-agency sharing. If we look at an example of one of these, National Health Service in Scotland, they use the data virtualization platform to share data both intra-agency within the organisation, within National Health Service Scotland, and also with other government agencies. So they're sharing data with regional health authorities, with hospitals, with research centres, etc. But they're also sharing data with other local authorities, with the emergency services such as the police, central government like the Scottish Parliament, etc. And you can see some of the use cases on the right hand side that they have implemented using data virtualization to allow this data sharing. An interesting one is the PARD project, Persons at Risk Distribution. The NHS, National Health Service in Scotland, keep a list of what they classify as persons at risk. These could be persons with mobility issues, they could be people with mental health issues, they could just be people who are living alone and are vulnerable, maybe they're old people or something like that. Now, if there is a declared state of emergency within Scotland, declared by the First Minister in Scotland, the emergency services have a statutory duty to do a health welfare check on these persons at risk. That's the only time they can get this information. Now, instead of waiting for the National Health Service to send them a list, they can actually come and get it themselves. They can connect to the data virtualization platform, this data gateway, into the National Health Service data, and they are allowed to get to the persons at risk list for their region. So the Strathclyde Police can only get the persons at risk list for their particular region, which includes Glasgow, for example. The Edinburgh Police can get the persons at risk list for Edinburgh and only Edinburgh. So it's controlled what they can see to protect the privacy and the confidentiality of the people on the persons at risk list, but it allows the emergency services to fulfill their statutory duty to go and do health checks, welfare checks on these people in a declared state of emergency, such as the recent coronavirus pandemic. Within Scotland, the health services, the emergency services, actually did welfare checks on all the people on the persons at risk list to make sure they're okay, make sure that they were getting the groceries, etc., that they weren't in any trouble, weren't overstressed or overwhelmed by the ongoing pandemic. So a great example of interagency sharing within the National Health Service in Scotland. Now, the last thing that I'm going to talk about in this tech talk is a great example of using data virtualization to very quickly connect to authoritative data sources in government agencies, in this case around the world. And this is the Denodo's coronavirus data portal. The data portal is actually an open data portal allowing users to access coronavirus data from around the world. So they can come here, and it's not just the usual information about coronavirus data, such as number of cases, number of deaths, number of hospitalizations, etc. It's also information about the government's response, whether it's at the state or federal level, the government's response to the coronavirus pandemic in terms of restrictions on number of people in meetings, to shutdowns, etc. Also, the socioeconomic impact in terms of unemployment claims, etc. So all of this information is available through the data portal, and it's free for people to access and use the data. We actually connected to 63 different government data sources, mostly government. There are some non-government agencies in there as well. 63 authoritative data sources from around the world, tagged and collated the data, categorized the data so people could go and find it and search it, etc. And anybody can go to the coronavirus data portal and go and browse the data, have a look and see what's there, sample the data, download the data, or they can connect with their own tools to build dashboards, etc. And we do have some users who are building back to work dashboards, sort of like decision guides for management about who should go into the offices when their state economy actually opens. Who is coming from areas, counties with high incidence of cases, where the office is in a county maybe with low incidence of cases. Should those people be traveling to the office like that, or should they stay and continue working from home? So it's a great tool for anybody to use. And we've connected, like I said, to 63 different data sources, and you can see the list here of all the data sources, including things like United Nations, the World Health Organization, Department of Labor, for example, obviously things like Johns Hopkins University for their coronavirus data. The New York Times is another one that we've connected to. But you can see at the state level, there are things like, the state of California, Health and Human Services, state of Texas, state of New York, etc. Down at the local level, New York City, Department of Health and Mental Hygiene is another one we've connected to. So a broad swath of agencies from around the world where we've connected to them using the data virtualization platform and provided this data portal based on the data virtualization technology. There is a data catalog where people can go in there and browse and look at the data, and you can connect to the data portal itself using tools, like I said, to build dashboards, include the data into applications and stuff like that. So that's a great example because we had a small team of engineers actually connected to all of these data sources in just a couple of weeks. Just a handful of engineers, and built out this data portal. And if you do want to go and look at the data portal, coronavirusdataportal.com is the URL that will take you to a landing page. If you scroll down a bit there, you'll be able to actually go and click on a link which will take you to the data catalog where you can go and browse the data to your heart's content. And with that, thank you very much for attending this tech talk. I hope you found it interesting, and I hope you found it valuable. Thank you very much.